Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, a big win for the Bucks. Their defense comes up big once again, holding the Nuggets below 100 points. Second consecutive game they have done that. We take a look at where this defense continues to show signs of improvement. Another amazing game from Giannis as well, and the chance at really rescuing what was a very, very difficult start to the Doc Rivers era. All of that and more coming up in the post-game edition of Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia here with you. You can hear me as well on the Bucks Radio Network, joined by the longtime host of the podcast, the founder of Brew Hoop as well, Frank Madden. And we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and viewable on YouTube as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Prize Picks. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/locked on and use code all lowercase locked on for a first deposit match up to $100. Frank, a pretty impressive win by the Bucks. It wasn't wire to wire, but it was as close as you get. Nuggets led briefly by 3 in that first quarter, but really after the Nuggets claimed the lead and the Bucks took it back, they never looked back, pushing that lead up to 28 at one point. We can get into who wasn't available, as you didn't see the backcourt for the Nuggets in the second half, but they were there for the first half, and this defense was stifling, holding Denver to 44 points.
Yeah, it wasn't, quite the domination that we saw against the Celtics a few weeks back. Up, what were they, up 33 at halftime, or was it? Well, it wasn't quite that much, but I think when you're stacking the most impressive Bucks wins of the season, I think this has to be right up there with that Celtics game. It was a weird game in the sense that Jamal Murray, I think he scored 35 or something in his prior game. I was trying to figure out what was going on with him. I saw some mention from the Nuggets fans about maybe him being sick or something. But obviously, we saw him dominate, and just the Bucks had no answers for him from mid-range in Denver a couple weeks back, and just a very different story in this game. And I thought the Bucks defense overall, I mean, to have one of your top 3 defensive nights of the season against a Denver team that not only obviously has proven it is an elite offense time and time again. And again, we saw guys drop off as the night went on, but they started the game fully healthy. It wasn't like this was some crazy back-to-back situation for them that, was they were rest impacted or something like that. So to do what they did tonight, from the outset, and Denver missed some shots for sure, right? The 3-point percentage obviously wasn't good, but Denver didn't hit threes when they beat the Bucks a couple weeks back either, right?
They're not a 3-point shooting team.
Yeah. They only took, I think, 18 in that game. And tonight they were settling for more looks. They were 11 of 40. And, I just thought the Bucks, we talk a lot about kind of, multiple efforts. And I think early in the season, first half of the season, felt like there were a lot of games where, it was pretty easy to see what was wrong with the Bucks defense, because it was just the guy with the ball drives by the defender the Bucks were trying to use on him, right? And a lot of blow-bys and just too easy red carpet getting to the paint. And so those points in the paint numbers were often bad, and, kind of chain reaction from that. And I just thought in this game, they just did different stuff. They were obviously at times, doubling. It's not like they've been super conservative since Doc Rivers showed up. I mean, they have, like we saw against Luka, they did a bunch of trapping and tried to get the ball out of his hands. We saw tonight at times they were showing those extra bodies, Giannis helping off of Aaron Gordon, who obviously he was not afraid to give up perimeter shots to. And I thought it was not just, we always kind of think about it, the pick and roll, it's the 2-man defense, and you often ignore the third guy and the help and all those other things. And I think that's really been the Bucks' problem is it's hard. It's been very hard to get them to play 5 guys in sync defensively. And this felt like a night where we saw that. And it wasn't just, the guy on the ball who did a better job, which I think Malik Beasley and others, AJ Green, right? Like guys just had a lot of like good possessions defensively on the perimeter. And then on top of that, I just think the second guy, the third guy, the fourth guy, and even the fifth guy just felt like there was more cohesiveness. You saw them forcing turnovers, which created easy buckets to transition. And, you talk about where they really blew the game open. It was with whatever it was, like a 14-0 run spanning the end of the first through the beginning of the second quarters. And Giannis was a part of that, but there were a bunch of role players that were part of that too, including Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton and other guys. And, but Denver can pick you apart as much as any team in the league, especially with Jokic and what he's able to do as a passer. But we just saw tonight the Bucks. I think it just felt like they were one step ahead for a large portion of this game, and that is not a phrase that I've been used to saying about the Bucks defense this season.
And Michael Malone talked about a lot of that before the game, too. And look, every coach gives the same speech whenever they're asked by somebody inevitably about Giannis and what makes him so challenging to defend. And we got to keep him off the line. We got to watch his cuts, and he's going to walk into those points. We got to slow that down. Michael Malone pointed the same thing out. None of it happened, but he talked about the defense, especially, and he was asked, what have you seen? Because the first game with Doc Rivers was against you. So when you review the film, what have you seen from this team that's been different? And he mentioned exactly what you did, that, they've been actually much more aggressive, that they've been creating more turnovers. And you've mentioned that. We've talked about it on other shows as well. That to me is the most remarkable part, is that we were told this was going to be an aggressive style defense coming into the season. We didn't see it. They were 30th in turnover rate. And now, since this coaching change, the Bucks are in the middle of the pack there. So they're causing more turnovers. But tonight really seemed like it was everything, that there's been a number of things you could point to of, well, they've improved here. They've been better in their transition defense, and the amount of possessions opponents are getting in transition. They're okay at defending it. They're just cutting down at the amount of times opponents are getting there. They're rebounding the ball better. And tonight that jumped off the page too, against a very good offensive rebounding team in the Nuggets. Bucks were elite on the defensive glass. So that's cleaned up the points in the paint and the second chance points, and they're causing turnovers too. But the other big part that Michael Malone talked about was, when you take Drew Holiday away, it's no longer that one guy that's the point of attack, and Giannis can just roam and clean things up. You need to play on a string more. And I think that's what this team struggled with for the first 40 or so games, was learning some of those tendencies. You don't learn that overnight. It's not just that Doc Rivers comes in, snaps his fingers, and it's there, but there's some clear signs that it's getting there. And I think especially when you mentioned some of those names you did, and you think about the way guys like AJ Green played in fighting through picks and screens, and Doc talked about that as well quite a bit after the game, that to get ready for this game, they showed a lot of footage from the Hornets game where they weren't getting caught up on screens. And then they showed the footage in the first Nuggets game where that's how they were picked apart by Jamal Murray. And that was the clear thing they were working on tonight, and it showed.
Sorry, I was muted. My internet did not go out. But I think it was always going to be hard for Adrian Griffin. I think after a while, when it doesn't seem like the defensive message comes through, and it doesn't feel like you're getting that cohesiveness that you're looking for. Even if Adrian Griffin had all the right answers, all the right adjustments, you kind of reach a point where it's like, I don't know that the message was going to get through. I don't know that you're going to get the subconscious / conscious buy-in that you need to not necessarily be like the most elite defense, but with this group to be, even average or slightly above average. You really need people bought in and playing, again, on a string, playing consistently, doing the stuff you want to do. And so, again, I think that was part of just, again, we're returning to kind of the upside of why you bring in an established veteran coach that's going to command the presence of the attention of the locker room and just be kind of a different voice at this point, right? Just, someone who can kind of maybe just simplify things to a certain extent. And I think that's largely probably what we're seeing. And because again, it's not like they've turn into a different team, right? It's not like they've suddenly like, they just play small all the time and, switch everything and they're like a different team than they were, a month ago, right? They're not. I mean, they're still the same group. I think certainly, obviously, there were injuries, Brooke being out with due to the birth of his child, right? There were some things that were headwinds, certainly on that road trip in particular, which, I think was part of the reason why, obviously, the record is not quite where you want it to be since the departure of Adrian Griffin and the arrival of Doc Rivers. But, hey, beating the Hornets, fine, like good. Thank you. On the second night of back to back, showing up defensively, that's positive. But I think this was obviously, a game that was much more of a measuring stick of where they were than that game. And if you can follow up the disappointing loss against the Timberwolves, where again Giannis is basically playing, with a bunch of role players and doesn't have the help that he needs, especially on a really top-heavy Bucks team to be as competitive as you want to be. To follow that up with two of your better defensive performances of the season, and then you have an opportunity against Miami on another back-to-back here. Miami is going to be a bit shorthanded as well. I think Bucks 2-0 against the Heat so far this season. I don't think the Bucks probably need to be reminded that they don't need to overlook the Heat, given everything that's happened between these teams in the history over the past few years. But if you can, again, just start stacking better performances, I think especially defensively, the stuff is a bit contagious and, it reinforces itself, right? When you get good results, then you get better effort, you get, better energy. And again, to what extent that is conscious versus subconscious, I don't know. But it just seems like the engagement was better. And, on a night like this, I thought Bobby Portis defended well,
Yeah.
I thought Pat Connaughton, who obviously we've had a lot of questions about Pat and kind of whether he's still defensively good enough to be a major minute guy. I thought Pat, had a number of good reads, broke up plays, his activity level. And we talked about obviously the perimeter guys, whether it was Malik, AJ, or, even Dame at times, the jobs that those guys did in, limiting Jamal Murray, who obviously we saw very recently can carve up any team. So yeah, I think again, we're going to over-index, I think, on the defense because that's where the concerns were. The offense has been interestingly a bit subdued, which is partly due to obviously the injuries. Chris, I think we're probably just going to assume is probably just going to sit out through the All-Star break just to stack some rest and come back 100% off that ankle. But Dame, solid performance against the Hornets. Really didn't need to be great tonight, but did have a little spurt in the third quarter to make sure that this game never got close. And again, no huge story there, but Giannis, after a couple of quieter performances as a scorer, reminded us again tonight of just kind of where he is in terms of the pantheon of NBA superstars. And we've talked about what it takes to get Giannis back in the MVP conversation. Well, outplaying Nikola Jokic and beating the crap out of the Nuggets, that's a pretty good thing to be doing. And so, now he just needs to keep doing this and, circling these games. He's done with Jokic for the season. He's still got a couple Boston games, so do some stuff against the Boston Celtics and win another game or two. Hey, that would be nice. And you still have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's also now in this MVP chase. So I don't know. Again, if Giannis was immortal, we'd be leading with what he did tonight and talking all about how amazing he was. But given we're so used to it, we leave it to a second segment type thing. So I don't know, Justin, if you want to pivot to Giannis, but he obviously was tremendous too.
He was at 2 games against the Clippers as well. So he's got a lot of these tests coming up that, look, not that he ever should have been out of it, but he's got a big opportunity to reinsert himself at the top of that MVP discussion here in these next couple of weeks with the schedule in front of the Bucks. We'll touch on that and also some of the defense that we saw against Nikola Jokic, because it reminded me of some things that we had seen previously, and I never thought I would be saying that the way that this season started. So we will get into all of that, the Giannis MVP talk, and more of the Bucks defense and what they did and some of the looks they gave to Nikola Jokic coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members, and they are the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because it is just you against the numbers. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. It's demon time on Prize Picks, and you can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Demons and Goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as those 4 correct picks. Prize Picks, easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's easy because all you have to do is go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. And again, that code is LockedOnNBA. Use that code. You'll get a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today, here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day and all of our local shows and national shows as well. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. Before we do get to Giannis and his chase for an MVP, the way the Bucks defended Nikola Jokic, Frank, after that first game, Doc Rivers had talked about, look, Nikola Jokic scored 25 points, but he needed 25 shots to get there. Tonight was very similar, 29 points, 25 shots. He took 12 shots in the first quarter. And you just don't think of Nikola Jokic as a high volume shooter. That I had to look it up. That is the second most field goal attempts in a quarter in his career. And it did seem as though the Bucks strategy, it almost reminded you at times of some of the defensive game plans we saw put in for guys like a James Harden under Bud, where the strategy seemed to be, we want Nikola Jokic to shoot because we think he's more deadly as a playmaker and as a passer when you have guys cutting, and we just have to stay alert and be ready for more actions defensively. If we give Nikola Jokic this open look, we know he can take it, but we'll take our chances with that versus him facilitating.
Yeah, and I think this was another good example. We've seen Brook, I think, at his best defensively in these one-on-one matchups. I think it stood out against Embiid. He's had a number of games against Embiid where he just doesn't foul him and, doesn't play the game with Joel and, lets Joel take probably more, not super contested mid-rangers than you would like because he's so good at those. But you're kind of playing the percentages, right? Like, again, like if a guy is going to be elite from mid-range, better to give up that than send him to the foul line a bunch or let him get to the rim and finish around the basket. And I think with Jokic, he clearly wanted to contest those mid-range shots and those paint shots. Like obviously they didn't want to just concede those, but he missed a few early, and certainly they seemed to be okay with giving him a little more room from the 3-point line. And he had a couple of those threes early that kind of helped keep the Nuggets within striking range. But I thought it was interesting, they didn't just play him one-on-one the entire night, right? I mean, we saw them send extra bodies. We saw Giannis rush him, force a turnover during that run in the early second quarter when they really stretched the lead out. They weren't afraid to send an extra body at times, which, I can crawl back to the Bud era. There were mixed results would probably be a very kind way to put it, but there were at least a game or two where they seemed to decide like they wanted to try to double and force him. Yet wasn't there that game where like they were putting Wes Matthews as the primary defender and then doubling with it, and it was just like, all right guys, like we're just kind of overthinking this. This was a little more chaotic and in a good way, a little less predictable maybe. And again, it wasn't like it was always just just send a regular double and hope that he makes a bad pass or something like that. Like it was bring extra help, then help back off, recover back off. And again, there was just the Bucks kind of just gummed things up just enough. Like I think back to that one play, Jokic had it on the left wing, and I think it was in the first quarter, late in the first quarter, and he had what looked like a decent look at a shot, and ends up firing a kind of, it was like a fake shot into a rifle interior pass for Aaron Gordon, and Bucks had enough arms and legs down there. I think Jay Crowder and maybe Brooke were down there, or Giannis was down there. Somebody was down there, and it again got deflected and goes out of bounds, and it's a turnover, right? And you look at the box score, for Jokic to have 8 assists and 5 turnovers, mission accomplished. Like if you limit his free throws, which again, not that he's a huge free throw guy, but limit his free throws, force 5 turnovers versus 8 assists. What else? What more can you do against Jokic? Given his playmaking ability and his scoring ability. Again, if he's going to score 40 on you, he can do that. But I thought, again, Brooke made his night difficult, made him work. And even when Brooke was out of the game, like I said, there were times where Bobby was in the game and didn't get just immediately, put under the rim and finish over for layups either. So yeah, I mean, you're never going to there's not like a shutdown Nikola Jokic plan, right? He's too good. He's too smart. But it felt like he was out there thinking to himself, I got to score because my other guys aren't scoring. And the defense is making things uncomfortable enough that I just need to try and go get myself some buckets. And he did get himself some buckets, but like you said, the efficiency, 29 on 25 shots, 5 turnovers. Again, you take that every day of the week.
Yeah, he was much more efficient in the second half, which ironically was when he didn't really have the help. 7 points from the starters outside of Nikola Jokic at halftime for the Nuggets. So it worked to perfection for the Bucks. And, Doc talked about that a little bit after the game as well, just what they were looking for defensively. We saw a lot of Giannis as the helper. This was one of his more impactful games in that aspect. I thought tonight, as he had, I think, 3 steals and 2 blocks, and he just seemed to be everywhere around the ball. And Doc said after the game, I just love him as the help defender when we can get away with it. That I think he reminds me of a free safety in football, that we can keep him around the rim, that he can make sure we always have rim protection between he and Brooke. And noted, we're playing with our guards up on the ball and we're taking guys off the line, that it's creating contested shots when you factor in the rim protection. So that's basically what we're seeing here defensively. He keeps talking too about, I don't want this to become mental. And I think we've heard JJ Redick and others point that out too, of you can see the Bucks earlier in the season are kind of overthinking things, and maybe they have too much thrown at them of, wait a minute, do I get this guy or do I get that guy, or who's going to be behind me on this? And, as everybody, former players have pointed out, and Doc has brought this up a number of times too, in the Don Shula line, the moment that it becomes mental, that's when you lose a step and your opponent beats you. That he doesn't want these guys thinking, what should I do here? He's kind of drilling in, don't do this, that this is what we're not looking to do. And I think we're seeing the results there on the defensive end of the floor. Again, it's 11 games. And it's not a huge sample size, but it's starting to become enough where we've seen in these 11 games, I think the Bucks are now tied with the Pelicans for the 5th best defense in the league since January 24th. And what's even more remarkable about that is, as we just spent the time talking about, the schedule that they've had, that I think it's 7 of those 11 games have been against teams in the top 10 in net rating. So yes, the offense has taken a bit of a step backward. Some of that is the players that haven't been on the floor for these games, but we needed to see this from the defense, and I think we're seeing more than I anticipated.
Yeah, and I was just looking at some of the stats that, kind of underlying it, like what's sort of been the difference. I think the transition numbers certainly are part of that, which always felt like, maybe some of the lowest hanging fruit, right? Just get back on defense. In the 11 games here since Adrian Griffin departed, Bucks are 3rd in terms of points allowed, points added per 100 possessions allowed defensively. So 1.1, which is 3rd. And then probably the most encouraging thing though is we saw at various points the Bucks have actually looked okay by that metric, but the frequency of transition opportunities that were allowed was off the charts. They were dead last. So there was some I think luck in terms of guys, teams probably rushing shots in transition, maybe pulling up for three, and Bucks maybe getting a little lucky with opponents missing threes. And so really what you wanted to see was the number of opportunities come down. So force teams actually play in half court more, because that's obviously typically going to be a less efficient way to play basketball than in transition. And if you look at that stat again, in these 11 games since January 24th, they're 7th in terms of the fewest frequency, the lowest frequency of transition opportunities allowed. And so I think that's, to me, that's kind of, again, one of those sort of underlying stats that, you're not going to think about a lot. You're not going to generally see, during a TV broadcast necessarily. But it, I think, speaks to some improvement in terms of the underlying fundamentals of the Bucks defense. It's not rocket science. Just like make the game be a half court game, right? I mean, if you do that, life is just going to be a little bit easy for you. And tonight, the paint point numbers kind of got close to equalizing by the end, but during the vast majority kind of this game, when in the first two and a half quarters, when it was decided, the Bucks had a clear advantage in the paint, and that was an area where it felt like in Denver, even if they tried so hard, even if they finally covered guys off on the perimeter, they would blow a switch, or all those back cutting. Yeah, exactly. I just think back to that Michael Porter screen that Chris and Giannis blew the assignment on, and he got open for a dunk late in that game when they really needed to stop. Obviously, we never got to that type of leverage position in this game. But you just didn't see those types of opportunities. And, in that game, it felt like the Nuggets really did a good job of kind of gumming up the paint against the Bucks. Bucks spacing wasn't where it needed to be. And in this game, again, just a lot of that felt like it got flipped on its head. And obviously having, a Hulk with Giannis that you can unleash is a big part of the advantage, because he obviously really had everything working there. Was hitting some mid-range shots and just getting to the rim. And again, just funny to think back. Remember at the beginning of the season, we're like, oh, Giannis had a knee surgery. Let's see with it, and then he literally looks as physically dominant as he's ever been, in terms of just the ability to get to the rim whenever he wants. And some of the moves, backing guys down and just swallowing up smaller defenders, Peyton Watson, whoever else, right? Like just really impressive stuff. And again, he was brilliant tonight. You mentioned the 5 stocks on top of 36, 18 and 5, right? Just numbers that we're just sort of numb to. They're so big, but they needed it, and it was good to see him kind of bounce back a bit after quiet games for different reasons over the weekend.
Yeah, points in the paint and turnovers too. There's a couple of the areas that really started to slide away in the fourth quarter when you had your non-regulars in the game for the Bucks. But that's, the other areas we touched on how much they've been generating turnovers and scoring off of those and using that to juice their transition offense. They've done a very good job of protecting the ball of late too. So all of these numbers that you point to in the hustle categories, the Bucks have been much improved in these 11 games. And will it last? You hope so, because it's been a big part of this turnaround for the team. So now 2 more games in this first half of the schedule that we'll touch on briefly, but we promised Giannis and his chances at the MVP, what nights like tonight do for that. We'll get into that conversation coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. This next segment, though, is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to somebody who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week. And that's where BetterHelp comes into play. Therapy can be for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get those things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, it's designed to be flexible, and it is suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, Frank, it's games like these that are going to do some for Giannis's MVP case. I think you're not really going to see his name start to come up until we get to the second half of the schedule. And a lot of that depends on how this Bucks team finishes the season. Is they're in an interesting spot. They did get a lot of help tonight with both the Cavs and the Knicks losing. But when you look at his numbers, and we've talked about this quite a bit all season long, the playmaking. He had another one of those plays tonight with the bounce pass to Malik Beasley in the corner where he could anticipate the help coming, knew it was going to be there, waited, and made the perfect type of pass. That's the stuff that isn't really going to buy you any MVP votes. It's the numbers, but those numbers have started to climb as well. And look, I think one of the challenges he's going to be up against is you have Damian Lillard. So how much of an impact is Giannis having? Damian Lillard's been a big part of what we've seen from Giannis when you look at career highs in his efficiency and his 2-point field goal percentages tonight, too. I think it was 10 of 11 that he started the game against Aaron Gordon and Nikola Jokic. He continues to put these types of games up. And I just continue to be struck by how he's no longer forcing things. We think back to the Giannis that was picking up offensive fouls. He got into foul trouble the other night. You thought it would be there again tonight, but it's no longer from charges and offensive fouls. And to me, that's the most impressive part, especially on nights where opponents or teammates' shot isn't falling. We've heard Doc Rivers say this too, that he's trusting the pass and he's believing in his teammates that shot is going to fall. And when it does, that's when this offense is almost impossible to stop, when Dame is clicking.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, right? Like the only upside of Dame's season being perceived a disappointment is that maybe gives Giannis a little bit more room to, make a MVP narrative case, right? Like if everyone was perceiving Dame as being perfect and having this incredible season, then I guess maybe that's a little bit harder. So I don't know. I mean, again, I think the most important thing is Bucks need to start winning games. They need to start winning, high profile games. Again, tonight's game, unfortunately, even though it's Nuggets and Bucks, it's Giannis versus Jokic, was relegated. It was an NBA TV game, but it was not, obviously a major draw game on ESPN or TNT. But we know there's a number of those games coming up. So, again, these are just opportunities to start racking up wins and start showing the league like, hey, Giannis is still Giannis, and the numbers are incredible, and the two-way impact is still something that again puts him in very rarefied elite company. So yeah, I think hopefully more of this to come. We've gotten used to it all season. He's been the rock that's really carried this Bucks team to respectability. But I think this is also where figuring out a way to climb back up to number 2, which they're now 2 games back in the loss column of the Cavs, who did lose tonight. Weird for me to be rooting for the Sixers against a non-Celtics team, but I did find myself rooting for the Sixers, the Joel-less Sixers, who've obviously lost a bunch of games lately with Joel Embiid out. They have 21 losses, but they were able to pull out a win in Cleveland, which has not a lot of people have done. I mean, the Bucks.
Yeah.
Winning 1 out of 2 and that homestand a couple weeks ago is actually pretty respectable. I think what Cavs had won 16 of 17, I think at some point here coming this week, and that one loss was that game in Milwaukee that the Bucks looked very impressive in. So yeah, obviously Cleveland, we'll see how they fare. Right, the irony was they were doing great without Garland and Mobley. Now they are back to relative full strength. So we'll see kind of how they continue to fare moving forward. But yeah, unfortunately, you don't get any more games against them. You didn't get the tiebreaker. You weren't able to win that last game. So we'll see. Obviously, you hope that they drop some games. And again, worst case scenario, the Knicks lost in Houston tonight. Go Rockets. My wife and I are both happy tonight with the Rockets doing the Bucks a favor. I think job one for the Bucks right now is make sure you stay in that 2-3 slot. And
yes,
again, if you end up having to in the second round be the road team going up against the Cavs,
fine.
Not the end of the world, right? I think you obviously feel like you have a path to beating Cleveland still. And again, I'm not going to take any series for granted for the Bucks at this point after last year. But I'd rather get Cleveland on the road in the second round than be the 4 seed and have to do it, in Boston in another second round series with the Celtics.
Well, not 4 seed is disaster, may be strong, but it's potential for disaster because of second round in Boston is inevitable. The Celtics are going to end up running away with the best regular season record in the East. And there is the looming possibility of, if you're the 4 seed, Joel Embiid just returned or is returning for the playoffs, and that's your first round matchup. So yeah, I don't care if it's 3. I mean, you want a title as the 3 seed, winning a game 7 on the road in Brooklyn, but you got to avoid that 4 seed if you're the Bucks. And that's where it helps of, you got a little bit of separation now between you and the Knicks. They're going through their share of injuries, and you have the tiebreaker. So that's at least the important part. Maybe you don't catch Cleveland, but just hold off the Knicks. And the last thing too, to take one final look at the Giannis. I mean, we're talking about Giannis MVP, and here we're not even at the All-Star break, but as of this moment, I don't think this is including tonight's game. He had the 4th highest odds on Basketball Reference's MVP tracker, just behind Luka Doncic. I don't see a world where Luka Doncic would be named the MVP this season. Nikola Jokic is the leader. It feels like it's strongly Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and the door is open for anybody else at this point.
Yeah, I think like with Luka, unless they somehow catch the Thunder, which doesn't seem likely, that the Luka
they're just not going to win enough games.
Yeah, that they're probably not going to win enough games, and so Shai is going to have the upper hand on Luka as sort of the scoring dominant lead guard type option for a Western Conference team. And as long as the Thunder are notably better, I don't really see Luka winning MVP. So. But again, I mean, I think if you're Giannis, can Giannis win MVP finishing worse than second? I think that's going to be pretty tough. I think you probably, need to finish second. There needs to be a narrative that, you were a team that played at least to expectations or above it in terms of the regular season, and hopefully finish strong. And that there's, a narrative around, hey, the Bucks figured it out. They got a new coach, and with Doc Rivers, they kind of found their rhythm and all that, right? Like that's the kind of got to be the built-in good vibes narrative. And Giannis obviously needs to be kind of the driving force of that if he's going to be the MVP. So we'll see. I mean, obviously, with the 65 game requirement, you never know, right? If Shai or, Jokic, who, Jokic just never gets hurt really. But if either of those guys obviously got hurt, then that would obviously kind of simplify things as well. But hey, like we said, it's just at this point, it's pretty simple. Like go out, dominate, win games, and especially when a lot of people are watching, that's an even better time to dominate and win games. So tomorrow you get the Heat. Jimmy's out for personal reasons. Duncan Robinson is questionable.
Duncan Robinson's questionable.
Out. Terry Rozier's been horrendous since landing in Miami, so that maybe doesn't help you.
But he's better than Damian Lillard, though. He's
80%. He's 80% of Damian Lillard, right? Scoring 12 points per game on 45% true shooting. That's 80% of Damian Lillard, right? Yeah. So obviously they're on paper shorthanded. They have a rest advantage. And Josh Richardson also out, just lost to a shoulder injury for quite a while. So yeah, hopefully we don't get the Jaime Jaquez, 38, 8.
Haywood Highsmith, 35
yeah, Haywood
points.
Highsmith, Tyler Hero, homecoming revenge game. But we'll see. Come on, Bucks, take care of business.
I mean, look, a very, very big opportunity in front of you. Not only that, but we said from the start that you circled the Hornets game and the Grizzlies game when you approached your final 5 games of this first half. Of you don't want to take anybody lightly, but these two are must. That we got to get these two, get at least one of those other 3 games, and you feel better about where you're going now. At this point, get all of them, or at least get 2 of those 3 games, and you're in a pretty good spot here. to wrap up this first half of the schedule. So it's the Bucks and the Heat tomorrow night or tonight, depending on when you listen to this. As Frank just mentioned, a very, very shorthanded Miami Heat team, which seems like it's going to make them all the more dangerous against the Bucks on night 2 of a back-to-back. We'll have the recap of that one and move into the All-Star break before you know it, and take a look ahead at the second half schedule for the Bucks, which remains very, very challenging. I've heard a few people ask me, so where do the Bucks sit with their schedule that's left? Just assume it's going to be in the top 5, most difficult from here on out, that it's only going to get tougher at the end of this first half schedule with a 500 Miami Heat team and a very bad Memphis Grizzlies team that I think they were 5th most difficult after tonight. It's probably going to be somewhere around 3rd or even 2nd after these 2 games to get into the All-Star break. So it's a challenging stretch ahead for the Bucks. But next up tomorrow night against the Miami Heat, we'll be back for the recap for that one. For Frank, I'm Justin. Thanks for tuning in to Locked On Bucks. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow.